right, great. So welcome everyone to this Simon Quick Takes Insights from the Dean's Corner blog. So thank you all so much for joining this session. I want to talk about recent research in which we look at the future of people's choices surrounding their personal data and both whether and how to keep it private. Now, as you all know, data is hugely important, right, in today's digital world, right? So firms and other organizations around the world, actually, they are collecting data about all of us really on an unprecedented scale. And the data that are collected, they can take many different forms, right? So it goes all the way from basic information like someone's email address to data about browsing behavior, to social media posts and friends networks, to kind of real-time data about your location, which is collected through your smartphone, to voice data, which is collected through smart speakers, right? And then firms and other organizations, they use that data that they collect about individuals for various purposes, including advertising, sometimes hiring decisions, or things like political campaigns. Now, this collection of data at such a huge scale raises some new concerns about privacy, right? And the reason is that while most of us, most individuals may be perfectly happy to reveal some types of information about themselves to firms, there are other types of individual information that most of us, many individuals, consider sensitive and would rather keep private. Right? Just as an example, I think most of us would be unconcerned, right, if a firm knew their favorite flower, but many of us might not want firms to know things like, their sexual orientation or their political views or maybe certain health information. Now, traditionally, privacy preferences and data sharing decisions by individuals have reflected these differences, right? So basically, if you consider certain data to be privacy sensitive, then you would not share that data, but you would still share the data that you do not consider privacy sensitive if you get some benefits, like maybe free services, in exchange for doing so. However, and this is really the starting point for our research study, advances in machine learning and prediction technology and artificial intelligence, they really challenge this very strict division of data into, that deemed sensitive on the one side and that deemed not sensitive on the other side. Right? And this is because much of predictive data analytics is actually about detecting correlations in big data sets, in particular, correlations between different personal attributes, right? So what that means is that it might be possible to learn about an individual's sexual orientation or, another personal characteristic that is considered privacy sensitive from that same person's flower buying preferences or, other seemingly innocuous data about that person. Okay, so you might think this is pretty far-fetched, but in fact, existing research in computer science has shown exactly this. Right, so there's a famous research study that made a lot of waves that has shown that a whole range of personal attributes, including things like, your gender, but also your IQ, whether you're addicted to illegal substances, your sexual orientation, can be predicted pretty accurately from data about that person's Facebook likes, right? So just to give you an example, I pasted a graphic from that study here, which actually shows that something like liking Hello Kitty on Facebook is correlated with a person being a Democrat or being an African American. Another rather fun example of a correlation that this study discovered and that nobody could have predicted, I think, ex ante, was that between liking curly fries on Facebook and IQ. So I don't know how many of the people in the audience like curly fries, but it turns out that liking curly fries on Facebook is actually a pretty good predictor of having a high IQ. So this observation, that sensitive data can potentially be inferred from non-sensitive data, then leads really to a new way of viewing privacy preferences, right? Where rather than you being concerned about the sensitivity of a particular piece of data, you are concerned about what information about yourself can be inferred from that piece of data, because that data is correlated with other potentially more privacy sensitive traits. right? And so what we do in our research is we analyze the implications of this new way of viewing privacy preferences for users' data sharing decisions and for firm strategy. Now, let me start with the user side. So as users, users of websites, users of social media, just, participants in the digital world that we live in, we basically decide on a daily basis how freely we share information about ourselves with firms. And the potential user responses to data sharing and privacy really fall into three broad categories, right? Users, excuse me, users could just give up on trying to protect their privacy and, just share data with abandon without even thinking about it. Or one could decide to share only data that you consider to be non-sensitive. Or the third option would be to go full, what we call digital hermit, and share as little data as possible, right? So a digital hermit in our language is someone who's dedicated to avoiding any type of data sharing with firms, even data that is not by itself deemed privacy sensitive. And our research predicts that users' data sharing decisions will polarize over time. So we predict a polarization of user data sharing decisions over time. So as firms learn more about the correlations between different individual characteristics, we predict that more users become full data sharers who share their data freely without even thinking about privacy. More users also become digital hermits who try to avoid data sharing as much as possible. But that middle ground of sharing only non-sensitive data is washed away. And the reason for this polarization that we predict is a so-called data externality across different users. Right? So users who share all their data, including their sensitive data, they help the firm to learn about the correlation between different individual characteristics. Right? Because they allow the firm to accumulate the data that is useful to build those models and to learn those correlations, right? Just to give you an example, if there are many users who post their political opinions on social media, and at the same time, the same users also reveal what animals they like best, am I a dog lover or am I a cat lover? Then the firm can learn that, say, I don't know if this is true, cat lovers are maybe more likely to be Democrats and dog lovers are more likely to be Republicans, right? And this is bad news then for someone who would like to exchange pictures of animals on social media, communicate with their friends about, dogs or cats or whatnot, but who would like their political views to remain private, right? So people who share their data very freely impose a negative externality on people who share only their non-sensitive data. And so what this means then is that sharing only your non-sensitive data becomes a pretty unattractive choice for users, right? And so at the end of the day, what we predict then is that users are left with two choices. So either if you value privacy sufficiently, you become what we call a digital hermit who shares no data. Or if you're less concerned about privacy, then again, realizing that there's little point in just keeping some of your data private, you just share all of your data, even the data that, really you would rather have kept private. So here's a graphical illustration of this polarization that our research predicts, right? So over time, as the firm collects more and more data, and therefore its ability to predict sensitive data from non-sensitive data improves, we predict that the share of digital hermits in the population rises, right? Those are those people up here who share no data. So everybody above the top line in terms of the strength of the user's privacy concerns. And at the same time, the share of full data sharers who share all the data also rises over time. But the share of people who share only their non-sensitive data, which seems like, the most natural thing to do, you share what you don't mind sharing and you keep to yourself what you want to keep private, share of that people actually goes down over time. And if the firm gets really, really good at predicting sensitive data from non-sensitive data, then at some point, there are actually no people left who share only non-sensitive data. So at some point, that middle ground washes away completely. Now, what about the firm side? Like, what are the implications of this for firm strategy? So what we show is that as firms collect more and more data, it becomes optimal for firms to raise the benefits that they offer to new users in exchange for sharing their non-sensitive data, right? So basically, you should offer higher prices, and prices may be free services to users as you get better at predicting these correlations, right? And that's both because getting access to non-sensitive data is more valuable for a firm if the firm can then use that data to predict additional things about that same user. And at the same time, consumers will be more reluctant to give up that data if they understand that the firm can use that data to predict other things about themselves. So both of those forces push towards higher prices for non-sensitive data over time as the firm collects more full data vectors and therefore becomes better at predicting sensitive data from non-sensitive data. Our research also predicts that firms, realizing really that collecting data today will make it harder to induce future users to share even just their non-sensitive data. Because of that, firms should actually try to actively slow down the collection of sensitive data, right? How is that achieved? That is achieved by offering lower benefits for sensitive data. So a firm that isn't yet very good at predicting sensitive data from non-sensitive data may try to actually refrain from collecting sensitive data in order to not build up that capability and thereby protect its future profits, because future users then won't ask for higher benefits, greater benefits for sharing even just their non-sensitive data. But what we also show in our study is that even if the firm does all of these things, at the end of the day, we still predict that polarization over data sharing decisions over time. It may happen a little bit more slowly, but it will still happen over time. And so over time, the share of digital hermits in the population will still rise, as will the share of full data sharers. And again, that's due to this data externality across different types of users, those with weak privacy preferences and those with strong privacy preferences. Now, to conclude, what does it mean to be a digital hermit? Does it mean that you have to go live in the woods? Not quite, but it does require a real commitment in our day and age, right? So if you really want to be a digital hermit, meaning you don't share any data because you are concerned that, even the non-sensitive data can be used to infer sensitive information about you, then what you should probably do is you shouldn't use a smartphone, but you should use a dumb phone, right? There's actually a bit of a revival of dumb phones among younger people, especially happening right now. Or at the very least, if you do use a smartphone, I do, you should turn off your location services. You shouldn't use smart speakers, and you should probably use social media as little as possible.